This is the performance trigger kit install for the Archon Type B. First, we make sure the weapon is unloaded and clear. Once we know it's unloaded and clear, we'll pull the trigger in a safe direction to drop the striker, and we'll go ahead and field strip the weapon here. Once the slide has been removed, we'll go ahead and remove our takedown pin. We'll use a hooked pick to grab the takedown pin spring, pull it upward. That pin comes right out the side. Next, we're going to remove our two frame pins using a 3mm punch. With the pins removed, we'll set them aside. And at this point, we'll use something to pry the frame up and out of the grip assembly. We're going to cup the frame from both sides to ensure that the parts don't come flying out. At this point, we will remove the slide stop, the ejector, the slide stop spring, the sear retaining pin, flip it over, and just to ensure that we don't lose this, we'll go ahead and remove our takedown pin retaining spring. And we're left with our sear and trigger group. Next thing we'll do is remove our trigger bar spring by grabbing the top of it and lifting it out from under the trigger bar. Next, we'll remove these two trigger pins here, starting with the top one from the left side, and then the bottom one. At this point, we'll take the trigger bar and lift it up and over the frame and remove everything down through the bottom. Next, we'll remove the plunger and spring for the trigger and set those aside. And we're left with our sear group at this point. To remove the sear, we're going to make sure that it is in the depressed position like so. And using our pick, we'll get into this hole here and pry up on it lightly. Pry up on it partially, and then we'll come up from the top side and remove it the rest of the ways. Make sure your finger is over this cavity here so that this plunger and spring don't fly away. Remove that plunger and spring. And now we have a stripped frame. Now we'll go and get our performance trigger kit, which is comprised of the trigger and trigger bar assembly, the sear, plungers and springs, and the wrench needed to adjust our over travel stop. So, first thing we're going to grab is our spring and plungers and sear, and we'll separate them here. So we have our sear. The larger spring is the sear spring. The larger plunger is our sear spring plunger. And the smaller two are for the trigger. So starting with the larger spring and the larger plunger, we'll get them pre-assembled like so. Adding a small amount of lubrication. We'll go ahead and insert it into this spring cavity here. Now taking our sear We'll go ahead and install it part way. And to install it the rest of the ways, we're going to need to compress this plunger and spring, and then we can push the sear down the rest of the way, ensuring that this sear has nice smooth movement, which it does. Next, we're going to install the trigger spring and plunger, which is the smaller ones. Same thing with these, we'll add a small dab of lubrication. And insert it into the spring cavity. Now that that's staged, we'll go ahead and get our trigger ready. So the first thing we're going to do is set our over travel screw about 10 revolutions out from the trigger to expose the threads. At this point, we're going to add a very small amount of blue thread locker to the screw. And then we're going to back the screw back into the trigger to spread that Loctite out inside. We'll remove any of the excess from the outside of the trigger. And then we're going to reverse it back out another 5 revolutions. So it should stick out from the back like so. At this point, we're going to insert it through the bottom of the frame, lift the trigger bar up and over, and we're going to make sure that our trigger is behind the plunger, and with a pinch from the top and the bottom, I'm going to align the trigger pivot pin hole so that I can install the trigger pivot pin, which is the lower one, about halfway. At this point it's captured, but I'm going to need to get in there with my pick and grab the trigger spring on the left side and pull it to the rear behind the pin. Once it's behind the pin, I can push in the pin the rest of the ways. Now that the pin is all the way in, you can see that the spring, it's in front of it, should be behind that pin. Like so. Now we'll insert the top pin. We may need to pull the trigger ever so slightly to get it to go to the halfway point. And same thing, use our pick to pull the spring back behind the pin as we push it in the rest of the ways. Our trigger bar has free movement, which is good. The last thing to install there is our trigger bar spring. Inserting the dog leg into the frame here, and then while holding that into place, we'll take the top leg and drop it underneath the bar. Before we do anything else, we're going to make sure that our over travel set stop is where it should be. To do this, the easiest way is to reinsert the frame onto the slide here. We're going to use our takedown pin and put that through our locking block. Charge the gun, and I'm going to attempt to pull the trigger at this point. It should not go off if I've set this set screw out far enough. At this point, I'm going to insert the over travel screw wrench into this screw. I'm going to depress the trigger until it is resting on the frame, and then I'm going to back off this screw until the gun fires. At which point I'm going to back it off another quarter to a half turn, and then I'm going to remove the wrench. We've now set the over travel, and we can remove the frame from the slide once more. Now we can finish reassembling the gun. So next thing will be our takedown pin detent spring. Put it in like so, and using our pick, lift this leg up and put it back into position, ensuring this stays down. We're going to roll it over, install our sear retaining pin, our slide stop spring, the slide stop, and the ejector. And while holding all this together, we'll grab our grip module and insert the frame back into the grip module, setting it down all the way. Now I will reinstall the roll pins in the frame. Long one in the back, short one in the front. Get them started with the hammer. And pushed all the way in with the 3mm punch. And the last thing is to put the takedown pin back in. We'll insert it from the right side here. Hold it in this position. Using the pick, we'll reach in, grab that retaining spring and pull upwards on it and push the pin in. Now the pin is captured. So last thing left to do is to reinstall our slide. And check for proper function. Trigger pivots like it should. Safety is working as it should. I have a defined wall. Nice clean break. And my reset is nice and short and tactile. That concludes the install of the Performance Trigger Kit.